Do not summon for Acheron. Or pull for her, maybe. We try to farm a little bit of dislikes and some comments down there. People are going to watch the first 5 seconds of that and spam us with dislikes and everything in between. But today, guys, we're going to be talking about all the reasons why you should either A, summon on Acheron, or B, not summon on Acheron, skip for whatever else might be coming to the game. I broke this down to realistically 3 different things, the 4th of which being should you pull, or the pull value there. So number 1, guys, is going to be relies on debuffs. This can be a pro and a con for her. We'll get into that in a second here. Next is going to be free-to-play friendliness, which is an actual con for her right now. And then number 3 is the current banner that she's on, which is actually a really big pro for her as well. So let's go ahead and hop into the list here. Let's go ahead and hop into number 1 actually, because we'll go through this list and break everything down, right? Let's talk about the inherent cons of this first, right? You need Inhility characters on the team at all times. First of all, you're always going to need 2 Inhility characters on the team. You're also going to need sustain characters that can allow you to get debuffs as well, right? So this is going to be super huge, but you also want a very specific type of debuff on the enemy, or a very specific type of way of putting debuffs on the enemy, and that's going to be instance-based debuffs, right? Because the big thing with instance-based debuffs is you can have an attack that puts 4 debuffs on the enemy, right? And if that 4 debuffs comes in a 1 attack, guys, that means that you have done 1 instance of debuff on the enemy, right? So that could be kind of detrimental to actually getting her ability and ult back up, but just because you're putting 4 debuffs on the enemy from 1 move doesn't necessarily mean you're getting your ult back up faster. What you really want is you want to be able to get ultimate moves from multiple different sources, right? So the perfect example of this would be someone like Pela, right? So Pela, you can get a debuff off from her basic attack if you're running pearls. You can get a debuff instant off from her skill move, which is, I guess, would replace technically the basic attack, right? And then you can get an instance off from her ultimate move, right? So realistically, she can maybe proc off 2 different separate instances of the, like, debuff, right? So offerings that Pela gives is 2 different debuff offerings, right? Someone like Big J or Zhao Cho is going to be her best in slot for something like this, so that is a 5-star character. We're going to get into that in a second here. So this ultimately means that you're confined to the teams that you can use, right? Because you always want your other characters on the team to be proccing off debuffs on the enemy, right? So let's say you had her E2, for example, right? Which basically allows you to only run 1 other Inhility unit on the team to give her the max buffs that she needs. You're still going to be running into issues where she can't necessarily build up her ultimate as fast because you're still needing those debuff procs off. Like, obviously, Acheron, let's just say she gives 2 stacks to herself, right? Let's say you have her E2 S1, right? You have your debuffer, right? Debuffer probably guaranteeing 1 stack every time they come around the turn order. Then let's go over to sustain, right? Sustain doesn't necessarily guarantee a debuff, but if you run a sustain or a preservation unit, which then has like the Trends of Universal Marker light cone, you could maybe guarantee 1 to maybe 2 debuffs for that, but then your buffer, this is where it comes into play at, right? Whereas your debuffer probably gives you 1 to 2 per turn, depending on how quickly you can get your ultimate back up. Your buffer doesn't necessarily do that unless you run someone like a Sparkle here, which can action advance her, and then that kind of replaces like the need for having another debuff on the team, because you can kind of get the crit damage bonus on Acheron and then continue to get those 2 stacks. If you're running someone else, you're like maybe a Robin or a Ruan Mei, you can't guarantee another stack, which means you can't guarantee her ult. She's an ult damage fiend, guys, okay? So that means almost all of her damage is going to be relying on the ult damage that she's able to do, meaning if you can't get the ult up consistently and fast enough, that would then in turn mean you're not doing as much DPS with her, right? So that's why I said even with like E2, you're still kind of confined to the teams you can run, because you still want an overall high output on the amount of debuffs you're putting on the enemy itself. So this leads us into now our pro section, because I do think this does offer some pretty good upsides as well, but these are more pay-to-win upsides, I would say, than free-to-play upsides, which is the better debuffers slash debuffs that you have for characters coming out in the future. She gets a value increase, right? So whereas, you know, you have like your crit-based characters that could get like an increase based off of like the amount of crit you're hitting on the enemy, normally debuffs are better for doing damage than buffs are for your allies in doing damage. And the reason I say that, guys, is because of the damage formula. I'll throw the damage formula on here screen now for you guys to see. But essentially what this means is a lot of your debuffs you're doing on the enemy come later in the damage formula, and it's a lot easier to get those buffs at the beginning of the damage formula, because that's basically how your character is built, right? Your crit damage, damage bonus, attack percentage, all of that's kind of built into your character, and then your buffers are really just enhancing that on your allies. What debuffers normally do is stuff like decreasing the enemy's defense, decreasing the enemy's res, decreasing the enemy's vulnerability. So it's doing all these things that come later on the action line, which overall nets you more damage in the long run. So getting more debuffers that can do more debuffs plus better debuffs is actually a super big pro for her. Someone like a big instance of this, right? Big J. Big J increased her viability a lot just because of the amount of debuffs he put on the enemy, and then the vulnerability he's putting on the enemy. Absolutely massive for her. Who also I think is going to be good? I think of Fugway, however you say her name. Fugway, Master Uguay, the Foxy and Mommy coming back. I think she's going to be really good too. She's a fire and Hildy type unit, which means she's basically a fire debuffer, right, guys? So I think that she's going to play really good into there, and you guys might say, oh, but Fugway might might do something with Super Break, and she's not gonna be that good. I actually disagree wholeheartedly with this argument, guys. I think Fuguei, even if she were to play in Super Break, I think that would change the meta for Acheron, and I think that would enhance her damage even more, because not only would she be doing crit rate, crit damage, damage percentage, damage bonus, debuffs on the enemies, she's also gonna have Super Break. And what does Break do? Break is a free debuff. That's a free instance if you don't break and debuff on the same turn, right? So ultimately, I think that would be a really big upside for someone like Acheron too. So I feel like whereas most DPS get worse and worse and worse as time goes on, I feel like she still kind of gets worse and worse and worse as time goes on. I feel like though she can get more indirect buffs in the way of debuffers getting added to the game that make her viability doesn't decline as much, right? So that's what I would say is a big pro for her, right? So she's kind of future-proofable in that way. The better debuffers we get, the better that she becomes inherently, because debuffers for her are more valuable than I feel like buffers are for like crit-based damage dealers, right? Or like your normal main DPS type of shit, right? I don't know what to say here. You know what I'm talking about, surely. Now, guys, what I want to talk about is number 2. Free-to-play friendliness. Now, free-to-play friendliness is an obvious downside, right? And what I'm going to kind of do here, guys, is kind of combine both the free-to-play friendliness aspect and the current banner aspect here, because I made a chart for it and I didn't realize that it's just kind of the same thing, right? So this kind of goes over the current banner, right? And this is why I say the current banner is good. First of all, you're getting a preservation unit, which is a big up for her. You're getting 2 inhibitor units, which is really good for her. This is going to be a best in slot 4-star for her, because Pela offers, first of all, defense down, right? Which is going to be super massive. And then she also offers a debuff instance with just about every single attack that she does, right? Not to mention, she can also build her ultimate back up really, really quick. It's an AoE ultimate, meaning it also pairs in really well with Acheron's ultimate move that hits every single enemy on the field. Now we're going to go into someone like Sampo, right? Sampo also benefits from instances as well, guys. So he's putting in a lot of work for the amount of instances you're doing on the enemy, because his basic attack, ult, and skill move all can put wind shear on the enemy, which inherently help her with getting her ult back out, but that's really the only thing he does, right? This is really the only pro with her. She doesn't play off a dot too much, so running him on the team is not like a big overall win. His ultimate move will be giving you increased damage dealt to like DOT damage, so in the grand scheme of things, not really good there. Now, someone like March 7th, right? A good thing with March 7th is ult will be hitting every single enemy on the field and have a chance to freeze enemy. So this would then equal like an extra debuff that March is able to do, right? So that's going to be super nice. On top of this, guys, she can run Trends of Universal Market as well, which is going to also be super good for her, because Trends equals 1 debuff per hit on her, right? So every time that she gets hit, she has a chance to actually inflict a debuff on the enemy. If you have her built into Effect Hit Rate Sum, which you'll inherently need to freeze the enemies with her ultimate move, then you technically should be getting this Trends buff off or Trends debuff off every single time the enemy attacks you. So she could be good for that. Now, overall sustainability is in the dumps, right? So I'm just going to put that down here. Sustainability is down bad, right? It's just kind of down bad. This is maybe not the best option to use. Honestly, I'd probably prefer Fire MC over March 7th in that team. People will probably flame me. The March mains will probably flame me in the comments down below for saying that. But overall, I don't think she offers that much inherent value in terms of sustainability. But if you're just starting the game, this is a very W banner for getting you just set up an online with Acheron, right? Because Acheron really does rely on having like a set in stone team, especially at E0, with having 2 Inhility units and this on the team, right? It really, if you have a team built with like this, right? Like this exact banner right here, you really don't have to worry as much about building her up, because she's just giving herself so much damage percent bonus already just from having these characters on the team, plus the defense down really is going to be tremendous in the early game, probably even to the mid game as well, and just clearing content all around. Obviously, after that point, you can swap stuff out, but that's what I want to get into now, right? Pela is the best in slot 4-star for her, right? As we mentioned before, Sampo, good for dot teams. Gwynaifen, good for dot teams. And then Luca, good for dot teams. Now, there are inherent things that Luca and Gwynaifen offer more than what Sampo can. They both do vulnerability on the enemy, right? So that could be something you can look at here. But they're not the best, right? Like, their vulnerability is super low. Like, the vulnerability they're able to give out is not too high, so you're not really affecting Acheron's damage too much. In the grand scheme of things here, these are all the Inhility characters we have in the game right now. These are realistically the characters you're going to be running on the team with her to be able to proc off debuffs. A lot of these characters are 5-star characters, limited 5-star characters at that you're going to have to pull for off their limited banner. First of all, Big J, probably her best in slot. Ting Yun, which comes out the patch after she comes out, right? You have characters like Black Swan, her wife, that puts defense right on the enemy, which is a really good option to put on a team with her, but alas, still a 5-star character. Overall, the big problem that I have with her is her free-to-play ability is that, while yes, Pela's good, you kind of need another 5-star limited debuffer on your account to actually make her function super well, because you really want the juicy debuff they're able to provide. Like, the vulnerability here, okay. The vulnerability here, okay. Doesn't really offer much value out of building her ult up in that vulnerability. Whereas with someone like Black Swan, you're getting defense shred, you're getting damage from DOT damage, like super good. Big J obviously vulnerability. Kafka can work because you can put Kafka on a team with Black Swan to help with the dot, and then also you're getting debuff from her follow-up attack as well. You're adding an extra instance of debuff on the enemy, and then like I said, Silverwolf really good. She can put a lot of debuffs on the enemy. Every single attack that she has puts debuff on the enemy, and then plus a really fat defense shred as well. Like, there are a lot of good 5-star options here, but there will be better ones in the future, okay? Which is kind of what I want to talk about now, which is the last point we were trying to make here, guys, which is, should you pull and what value does Acheron off your account? So this is kind of how I see the value with the different type of characters we have in the game. We have support, sustain, and then DPS characters, right? DPS characters normally go up here really quick, and then they start declining really fast, right? Because that's the main thing we get into the game. We're mainly getting DPS added into the game. Then you have someone like a sustain character, right? Which sustain goes up. They do their job, they sustain you, but they slowly go down. Then you have someone like a support character, which goes up, and then it has its downs, it has its highs. It depends on whatever the DPS meta is at the time. That's how good they're going to do, right? If we take someone like Sparkle, for example, right? Sparkle has, by far, in a way, dropped hella in tier list rankings simply because of the fact that there's not really many crit-based DPS in the game right now. So mainly your amplifier characters here are going to rely on what the current meta is and what they're playing into. That's why you see both of these characters at the top here. Follow-up meta for Robin, and then you see break meta for someone like Ruan Mei, right? That's why you see someone like Big J up here. He plays really well with Acheron. He plays well with break teams. He plays well with just about every single team, right? And that's where I kind of want to lead you to, right? Value. Overall value for DPS is not too high, but I will say, for someone like Acheron, right, I think Acheron's overall value is a bit higher than your normal DPS, and the reason I say that is the reason I mentioned before, right, that she is playing off of debuffs, which have higher, I guess, damage output, or have a higher, I guess, damage possibility, right, because debuffs are super hard to get in this game, and if you're able to stack those debuffs off, and she relies on those debuffs, you already want to be putting a team with her, together with her, with those debuffs, gonna be super good. Also, a reason why I think she could be valuable in the future. If we get a sustain character that is, I guess, does the job of a sustain, but in inhility form, right? Which means you would have 2x inhility characters on the team, right? Then you'd be able to slot in someone like a buffer there, and then that would also offer her value as well, right? Because she plays off the debuffs, then you can add a buffer onto the team. You're not really having to worry about getting, I guess, healing as much because you have those 2 inhility characters on the team, one being a sustain character that's able to put debuffs on the enemy as well. I think that is going to be a super big clutch moment in time for someone like an Acheron, right? Now, with the take of should you pull, right? I think it depends on what state of the game you're in. If you're just starting the game out, I think Acheron's a really good pick for you because this will help you get through the early into the mid game and even into the late game, right? And provide you with a lot of value to your account, and you can build on her after the fact, right? Because you have all the pieces you need right there, and by the time you get to that late game, you're gonna already have these new characters into the game that will probably help her out or help other teams you have, right? If you're in the mid game, you already have some teams built. Probably not worth. If you're in the late game already and you don't have teams built, probably not worth. I think the only way that Acheron's necessarily worth it right now is if A, you already have Big J in your account and you kind of have the pieces of the puzzle together. 2, you're just starting the game. I think those are the really only 2 ways that I could recommend pulling for Acheron. Not to say that she's bad by any means, but I think the only way I would say to summon for Acheron would be if you're just starting the game out. That's about it though, guys. I think Gallagher's a really good option for sustain. I think Adventurine's a really good option for sustain. I think you should obviously be building your sustains up first because they help out every single team versus Acheron just being the DPS for one team. But yeah, anyways, guys, that's my take on Acheron. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you agree, if you disagree, let me know. I don't know. Bye, guys. See you later. Bye.